Rajni Bakshi, hello. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk to
Namaste.
EcoResolution.
Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to meet you.
So EcoResolution has been exploring non-violent direct action over the past month because we're very interested in movement building. And you talk a lot about non-violence, and this is an area that you're very interested in, and you do a lot of writing and a lot of videos on YouTube. So I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about your journey, about what you do, and why non-violence is a topic that you're so interested in.
Okay, so I'm a writer and a journalist and public speaker. I live in Mumbai, and I have been writing about people's struggles with the development model, with notions of progress, and also about identity-related conflicts. I would say about 40 years now. And, throughout the whole spectrum, whether it is displacement and other miseries caused in the process of development, I will use development in quotation marks here, or it is the more obvious kind of violence, which is people killing each other in ethnic and what in India we call communal conflicts. The basic fundamental issue is, what do we do with violence? What is the reality of what is the nature of this human propensity, and why, despite this is how I actually began this inquiry about 4 years ago, was that how and why is it that despite so much discouragement, the effort for nonviolence persists? And it's not just because, and when I say discouragement, I don't just mean the fact that many of the more famous advocates of nonviolence have themselves been killed, most famously Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, but that at an ordinary level, among activists on the ground, people in everyday life, um, it is truly an ideal that refuses to go away.
And so your interest is more in like the discouragement of non-violence more than it is in why violence is such a part of human cultures.
Well, both. I have been looking at both phenomenon. Um and I must tell you, it's a very ongoing journey, which I consider still to be in the early stages. So I'm no authority on the topic of human evolution and violence, but I do know this much already, which is, you may call it a very kind of for dummies level of understanding, that uh, it was part of the larger misreading and, in a sense, misinterpretation, wrong interpretation of Darwin, that the dominant mindset of the late 19th century and early 20th century told us that violence is the more natural propensity of human beings. It also goes back, actually it goes back to the whole enlightenment phenomenon, of Hobbes saying that life is basically short, nasty, and brutish. Gandhi disagrees with this always. Whether he did it from an instinctive grasp of the human condition, or he was, reading up that much on the history of human evolution, I don't know. I think it was a combination probably of both acquired knowledge and instinctive understanding. But if you look at life in most parts of the pre-modern world, yes, of course there are moments when life is short, nasty, and brutish, but that's not fundamentally what it is.
Yes. Well, yesterday evening, my sister and I did an event which was about relating and relationships. and we had 3 different speakers, one of which was Rianne Eisler. I don't know if you know Rianne's work, but she wrote The Chalice and the Blade, which talks about this kind of spectrum.
Of course I know her work.
Yeah, she's...
Yes, and The Wealth of Nations. She wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations.
Exactly, and a new book called Nurturing Humanity. Sorry, excuse the dogs in the background.
That's right.
But yes, so Rianne was speaking, saying that that as children, we kind of look at the start of humanity as a caveman with a club in one hand and then pulling a woman by the hair lying on the floor in the other hand. And that's kind of our image of like man in his most basic essence. And Rianne was kind of saying about like the importance of us contesting that as the kind of the essence of man. And I feel like that kind of relates to what you were saying as well, because we have this misinterpretation of Darwin where everyone says it's all about competition, but really he spoke much more to cooperation and to that side of human existence. And I think it's we also was discussing this kind of this argument, like, is it nature or is it nurture that kind of makes people more have more of a propensity towards violence and different attributes. But really, she was saying it's kind of because of the neuroplasticity and the adaptability of the mind, it's what we're surrounded by. So if you're surrounded by violent cultures, or if in education we're constantly learning about the wars and the battles and the rapes and the pillages of the past, which obviously we need to do, but that's so out of balance with also like the moments of like cooperation and community and solidarity. And so I think we have this kind of vision of the world as being an inherently violent place, and therefore see man as existence as inherently violent, when actually it's not the case. And you get that as well when you read the newspapers. It's just violence after violence after violence after violence. We need to understand what's happening in the world, but if that's not balanced with an understanding of all the good that's going on as well, we have a very skewed understanding of humanity.
Absolutely, yeah. Essentially that's what I was saying. Also, I would just add to what you're saying that over the last 50-60 years, multidisciplinary research, both in the natural sciences and the social sciences, has shown us that actually cooperation and mutual interdependence may have played a much bigger role than we've realized earlier in the evolution of the human spirit and of human societies. Now, to a pre-modern mind, this is obvious. It's only when we are now wanting a research study for every thing that, before we can call something valid knowledge, that this research also then becomes very significant. But I think it should be obvious to anyone who has seen how a human infant survives.
Yes.
That's the clue.
Yeah. And so you've been very involved in activist forums. I'd love to hear about how you see nonviolence within like an activist kind of sphere. Like, why is nonviolence so important for activists?
So one is, let's look at it historically for a moment. Almost every spiritual and religious tradition of the world emphasizes the importance of nonviolence. Now, when we say this, it's very important not to define nonviolence in some very absolutist terms. So, for example, clipping your nails is not violence. Eating vegetables is not violence. Actually, even eating meat in itself, by itself, in many conditions, is not violence. So if we define the term violence too extremely broadly, then nonviolence becomes impossible. But let us say for a moment, okay, firstly, that non-violence is not the absence of physical violence. That much is clear. But even in physical violence, I think we need to distinguish between deliberately inflicting suffering and that violence which happens in the cycle of life. So, for example, one of, currently the YouTube channel that I curate called Ahimsa Conversations. Ahimsa is the Sanskrit word for non-violence. We recently had a guest who is a rainforest conservationist, Suprabha Seshan, and she explains how in the natural world, because all life subsists on some other form of life. So in the natural world, that is not called violence. The lion eating the deer is not to be considered violence. What is violence is when you or I kill the lion or the deer just because the skin of that animal will look pretty on our wall.
Yeah.
Or even worse, we kill it just for the thrill of seeing, if we can shoot that straight.
It's kind of like you kill for the sake of killing itself. But like when it becomes like that, or if it's based in like greed or fear or anger, but when
that's one,
but
and
when,
also
yeah.
just for pleasure.
Mm.
I mean, maybe perhaps the fox hunt is the most one of the depictions of that phenomenon. As one of my mentors said about the fox hunt, it is the unspeakable chasing the uneatable. So there is a distinction to be made between that killing which happens in the cycle of life and that which is done out of sadism, which covers also, this bizarre tendency that we do find in the human species amongst hopefully very few members of our species who seem to enjoy inflicting pain. That's why that's why I use the term sadism. And also violence for oppression, just to dominate. That is really what non-violence is standing up to. And non-violence is the way of seeking to solve those forms of injustice and inflicting of pain without starting a new cycle of violence.
Yes.
Because there is the history of injustice is full of attempts to solve violence through violence.
Yeah.
But there are long-standing, powerful examples of standing up to injustice with non-violence. Gandhi is not the first figure on the historical stage.
No, there's been a lot of research as well into this about the success of violent versus non-violent resistance movements.
Yes.
And they're somewhere in the EcoResolution website, but and I think the Engler brothers wrote a big book about it. But it's something that me and my sister like to explore as well, as like how do we ensure that our action and our change making isn't recreating the same systems of oppression that have caused us this issue in the first place? And I think when we can think about non-violence, it's a form of resistance that creates a dilemma for the people in power, whereby if there's an angry group of people, they have a very good excuse, well, not a good excuse, but they have an easy excuse to go and use violence on those people. But if you are there peacefully, non-threatening, and then violence is put to you, then there's like huge so actually, even if violence does occur, there's huge media coverage, and that that protest gets a lot of awareness. But if not, then people have to just be there, and there is then like the daily life of the people in that part of wherever they are can't occur. So you kind of create a dilemma whereby action is needed to be taken.
Sorry, Christabel, can you just repeat the last part? I'm losing a part of what you're saying.
Oh, sorry. We're just saying that there's a dilemma is created for the people in power through nonviolence, because they're creating an obstacle for society. It needs to be addressed, but they can't do it through oppression. Well, they try and they do it, obviously end up doing that a bit. But yeah, it's very interesting. And I think we were speaking before as well about the importance in this time to be cultivating.
Sorry, you have to hold it very close. Otherwise, I keep missing what you're saying. The mic.
Let me try. Hang on. Is that okay now?
This is much better. Much better. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry about that. Yes, we were speaking before as well about the importance of cultivating deeper responses to the crises of our time at the moment. And I think the cultivating of non-violence within our movements, but also within ourselves as well, is crucial to be able to face the crises that we face today, because with mounting insecurity, mounting social movements, I mean, this is an amazing opportunity in many ways, as the cracks are opening for us to be able to kind of start to break these systems down and rebuild new ones. But if that isn't done with nonviolence, then the consequence could be just more of the same.
You know, but there's a problem here. I'll just highlight something that you said, which struck me, and then I'll come back to the nonviolence point. Historically, this idea of breaking down a system so that you can build something new and better has proved to be very dangerous. I don't know of, and I'm not a great student of history. I'm just a lover of history. I mean, I'm an amateur history reader, but I don't know of an effort which broke down a system without bringing tyranny. And tyranny is joined at the hip with violence. Okay. Why? Because every time anybody, even the most sincere, the most well-meaning, the most good-intentioned people, the moment you think that you have the final formula for the society that will work better, you're half a breath away from being a tyrant. So beware of everyone who is confident that they have the formula for utopia. It never ever happens that you can make it through without in some way becoming tyrannical or unleashing tyrannical processes. Now, that is all well and good, but the fact is that at the moment we are living in realities that are also very tyrannical. So what do you do about that? And I know that we live in a time when, because of climate chaos, we think that everything is in fast forward mode, right? Because certainly climate chaos is not going to happen in slow motion. We know that. And yet, even then, I'm really quite fascinated by the paradox that how do we make haste gently and slowly? Because we do need to make haste to have some really big macro changes, you know, in terms of what kind of energy we are using, in terms of production systems. But the issue is not just carbon in the air. I don't know if you want to move on to climate change in this discussion, but so to answer your question, going back to your earlier issue, this is why the nonviolence approach is so important. And an essential part of nonviolence, as far as I can tell, is that nobody gets to claim that they have all the answers. Not even the best intentioned people. The moment we claim that we have all the answers, we're going to treat others who don't agree as the enemy.
Yeah.
And then it's downhill from there.
Yeah. It's so important that, and I think a huge part of the issue currently and the resistance to change is that there's this feeling that like these institutions have all the answers, and that's why they haven't changed for like however many hundreds of years. And like really for systems, I think, to be like regenerative, as in to not cause harm and destruction, they need to be able to adapt and be flexible and change with time, as does all natural living things, as do we as well. So it's that like clinging to these ideas that can cause so much tension and so much conflict, and therefore oppression. I'd love to ask you a question about Gandhi, because I know that he said that whilst he was non-violent and obviously, you know, this amazing proponent who's inspired so many movements since, and so many activists since in non-violence, he actually said that satya, truth, was more important than ahimsa, non-violence. Could you speak to that a little bit and explain why he said that?
I'm not sure that that's an accurate quote, because for Gandhi, truth, God, and nonviolence are kind of in a single continuum. Okay, I'll tell you, maybe the context in which you may have seen that is that truth means that I am committed to honoring the life and dignity of others. That's a truth. And if that means that I have to use force to protect somebody, in that situation, yes, that truth will be higher than an absolute nonviolence. You know, if somebody is beating a child, uh, and you have to push that person, or I don't know, maybe even use some kind of non-injurious violence to stop him or her from beating the child, and if that is deemed to be non-violence, then yes, that action of protecting the child from violence is the truth that comes first. I think it would, maybe that is what
Yes,
was being.
that was it. And I think that
Yeah.
kind of links nicely as well what you were saying at the beginning, whereby non-violence is a little bit more nuanced. Like there's obviously death in the natural world, but like that's a cycle of life. So it's about actions which kind of contribute to the overall flourishing and thriving of life, and like towards more life, rather than kind of violence for violence sake, or for oppression, and for power and control. I'm aware of time. It's gone so quickly, Rajni. I just love to ask one more question. So you're based currently in Mumbai, and you're lecturing and talking a lot about non-violence. How is it feeling in India at the moment? And are you seeing it like more of a resurgence of social movements and non-violent activism? How is it?
Yeah, I don't know if you have been following our politics. We had a huge upsurge in youth-led political protests in end of last year and early this year. In fact, it was only Corona, the COVID-19 pandemic, which in a sense, put all that into suspended animation. And it was a very widespread phenomenon, young people and older people together, and it cut across classes, it cut across castes, and the issue was basically to defend the universal nature of citizenship of India. I won't go into the details here, that's not important, but basically the issue was the spirit, the letter and the spirit of the Indian Constitution, which we do regard as a very, very highly evolved document that has put us on the track to a society in which there will be dignity for all, without conditions, and without any kind of identity basis, whether it's ethnicity related or any other form of so yeah, it was very, very heartening to see how much of that protest was non-violent.
Yeah.
It was not 100% non-violent, but I would say it was overwhelmingly non-violent. And yet, if you're going to look at it from the Gandhian perspective, then we would need much deeper research to know how much of that was being led by people who are in favor of passive resistance, because passive resistance is not non-violence. Passive resistance often is tactical, and often it just means that, okay, just now it is not in our favor to use violence, it could go against us, so for the moment we won't use violence. In the Gandhian frame, that is not non-violence.
Why?
Because if you're, let's say this, desisting from violence is not non-violence, or tactically not using violence for the moment because there's some strategic reason you've decided that it suits you better at the moment, that's not non-violence. Non-violence fundamentally is the willingness to believe that you can transform your opponent, that your opposition is to a certain action, to a certain something, not the people who are responsible at this moment for that something happening. So for example, if we're going to talk about climate change, yes, okay, carbon is an issue in climate change, but our enemy is not people who are running carbon spewing companies. Our enemy is the whole process by which we are so.
Can you repeat that?
And so it is that process that we have to rectify.
Sorry, can you just repeat that? You said our enemy isn't the people spewing the carbon, and then what was the second bit? It just cut out for a second.
Because it's the very old Christian concept of focusing on the sin, not on the sinner.
Mm. Yeah.
See, for example, if you look at the Russian Revolution, okay, so the Tsar was a tyrant. The revolution got rid of the Tsar. But the real sin was not the Tsar, it was tyranny. And the revolution eventually gave the people a much more and a much more deeply entrenched and equally brutal form of tyranny. So the sin persisted.
Yeah.
And hundreds and thousands of people went to the gulag.
It's really interesting. Thank you for bringing up this example as well. But it's something that I'm very interested in and want to explore a lot more, because we currently are hearing so much that capitalism and colonialism are the root of all evils in the world. But really that is what is being expressed all the time, and I think that capitalism and colonialism are evil, and that needs to be, but to think that is the root cause of our issues, I think we're not looking deep enough, because what was before colonialism and what was before capitalism, I see it as these kind of parts of culture which have like steadily kind of expanded to what it is today, and so I feel concerned when people say that, because I worry that then the next thing isn't going to be looking deep enough to kind of what's behind capitalism, what's behind colonialism, and how can we heal those rifts within ourselves and within our societies, so that something like colonialism and capitalism would never be able to occur, or the effects of those would never be able to occur.
No, you're very right. I completely share your concern. Also, but there is one thing that is worth focusing on, Christabel, which is that I'm not suggesting for a moment that the world before or life before capitalism and colonialism was in any way perfect. There's never perfect society. But the human species has never known such a monoculture. There was such a diversity of approaches to life in the pre-capitalist. Actually, the issue is not even capitalism, it is modernity. That actually is the root of it all. Even capitalism is a byproduct, and I know there are many people who argue that colonialism and modernity are inextricable. I don't think so. I think modernity is a much more pervasive phenomenon, and that's why it has it's eating through the innards of societies long after the colonial masters have gone. And I think the most worrisome thing in our present moment is that now the combination of technology, mass culture, and mass culture pretty much covers, I think, what I'm saying. So technology and mass culture together are giving us a global monoculture. And that is the most frightening. And by the way, I think it afflicts even our search for alternatives. There's more diversity in the alternative seeking communities, yes. But I wonder how deep that diversity goes. I'm sometimes not, very hopeful of that. I don't know if I'm making sense here.
No, you are. Thank you. And this is what I think Vandana Shiva calls a monoculture of the mind as well. This product of our globalized systems that are disconnecting us from ourselves, from each other, and from the land. And yeah, thank you. I feel like we've run out of time, but I know I could speak.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Pleasure. And Rajni, for everyone listening, we will put your YouTube channel and resources up on our website so that people can really listen and go on a deeper journey. So it's been a short interview, but I hope it kind of opens some doors for exploration for people into looking at cultivating deeper responses to the issues of our time.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.